literally a fate worse than death, because the sentence is actually to be hanged and then dissected. Okay, so this is actually a sentence worse than just being hanged. You are being hanged and then your body is sent for dismemberment by student medics. Yeah, I'm here to talk about my crazy pathological obsession with body snatching, which actually all started out with the combination of lockdown and a somewhat drunken conversation with a history festival, because I was asked if I could do a historical demonstration of something historical to do with medicine. And we racked our brains around and then just latched onto the idea of the one thing that nobody ever really talks about in medical history is the body snatcher. And so that then resulted in a long conversation about how it could be done, telephoning that history festival director and saying, well, we could demonstrate how to snatch a body. And he just went, absolutely love it. Get on with it. And thus I started digging into this an awful lot further. Pun there, absolutely intended. So what I've found is that the body snatcher is one of the most kind of mythologized and one of the most misunderstood areas of crime, really, in the whole of history. Pretty much everything that we think a body snatcher is, they're not. So the idea being tonight is that I'm going to go through the history of body snatching, why it becomes a problem, and why it becomes the major problem that it does. But then to get you to understand the body snatcher, there is only one real important way of doing that, and that is to teach you all how to do it. I have actually tried it. I didn't use a real body, but we have dug a grave, we have put a coffin in it, we put a resuscitation doll in that coffin, filled it in, and then went to it with all the equipment of a body snatcher, and we've proven it can be done in the times that we talk about. So that's just a rough kind of background to how I got into this bizarre subject. As was said at the start, my podcast that I run every week is called History Rage. Actually, what I'll be referring to is one of our first History Rages that we ever did, which was about the art of the body snatcher about 4 years ago. So if you do want to look up History Rage and go back, right back to the start, I apologize for the worst sound editing that I've ever done in my career, but it is an absolutely brilliant episode. So to start off with what the body snatcher is, let's go right back to the cause. And the cause, like every damn evil thing in history, goes all the way back to Henry VIII. Henry VIII starts this problem. He starts a whole load of other problems as well, like workhouses and things like that. But let's focus on this. And what he does is he issues this law that allows, for the first time in history, allows for the dissection of human cadavers by the Royal College of Physicians. Okay, prior to that, it's a big no-no, in England at least. If you wanted to study medicine or if you wanted to study surgery and you really wanted to do it properly, then you had to go to somewhere like Paris or Padua, where their universities would actually allow you to dissect a human body. But England, until Henry VIII, that is a major no-no. But he passes this law to bring himself more in line with Europe, and it grants just four human cadavers passed from the gallows, so hanged criminals, to the Royal College of Physicians, so that they can A, practice surgery, and B, any new surgeons that are coming on board, new people training into the profession of surgery, not medicine, but surgery, that they can actually practice their art. Because anybody out there who's had any form of operation, I think one of the things that may well have been going through your head before that operation started is that you really want to hope that it's not the first time that the guy's done it at all. And prior to this law, that could very much be the case. It was very experimental. The surgeons were the barber class. basically. They were pulling teeth, they were amputating limbs and things like that. They weren't doing any real complex surgery. But if you're going to amputate a limb, bear in mind this is in a time before anesthetic. It's in a time before, real care around hygiene and things like that. What you want to do is you want to be able to do it quickly. And if you're going to amputate a leg below the knee, the one thing you really need to know is where all the blood vessels are, because you want to tie them off damn quickly. And there is actually some beautiful footage, which goes much further in history, of a guy that was actually taught before the days of anesthetic. Cinereel's actually shot in 1903, I think, and he can do a below-the-knee amputation in less than a minute. And they've actually recorded it on film. It's in the Thackeray Medical Museum at Leeds. Maybe in grainy black and white, it'll still take you about 6 attempts to get through it. It's quite gruesome, but it's there. So speed is of the essence, but also knowledge is of the essence. So that's then kind of where all this starts. And then because we then develop this further and further, we're getting a lot more people that are being hanged, and we're getting a lot more corpses that are being passed over to the Royal College of Physicians and would later become the Royal College of Surgeons. And then we're getting more and more students, and we've got quite an impressive amount of medicinal and surgical teaching going on within the UK. And bear in mind, none of this is free as well. So surgeons are making a load of money from all of these classes that are going on. There is an awful lot of money to be made in surgical teaching. Now, what brings in the body snatcher is really, we start to get civilized. And I've got a graph here. If I can show it up there, I'll just move that out of the way. So what you can see there, this is executions across decades. Okay, and as you can see, we're hanging a few people, starting really in the sort of Henry VIII sort of time period here. We get quite a lot during his reign. As you see, it dies off a little bit more. Surprisingly low number during the reigns of Elizabeth I, Mary I, so forth. And what I'm going to do is take you all across here to this bit here, which you will notice there is a massive spike that starts in around about 1750. It's a thing known as the Waltham Black Act. And I will come back to that a little later on. That is relevant. But what we have then is, if you go from this peak here, you see there is this massive drop in the amount of executions. Because what we've done here is we've got all civilized, and we've started to develop things like transportation, imprisonment, and other things like that, where prior to that, you could be hanged for virtually anything. So the number of hangings that we do massively drops off. And then there's a little bit of a spike in the early Georgian period again. And then it massively drops off down to virtually nothing down here. And this area here, 1820 to 1830, is really what I'd call the golden age of the body snatcher. Excuse me. So what's happening is that we're now getting more and more students, and it is a requirement of these students that they need to be able to dissect at least one human cadaver in order to be able to pass their exams and qualify as a surgeon. There is a practical to this. We're getting more and more students. I mean, if you take Astley Cooper, for example, Astley Cooper taught 700 students per term, and they would be witnessing dissections each time. He is one of hundreds of surgeons across the United Kingdom that are covering this. But we're now getting fewer and fewer and fewer corpses that you can obtain via a legal route, because at this time the law is stating that it's corpses that come of executed criminals. When it actually starts out, it is literally a fate worse than death, because the sentence is actually to be hanged and then dissected. Okay, so this is actually a sentence worse than just being hanged. You are being hanged and then your body is sent for dismemberment by student medics, which sounds as bad as it really is. So into this then, you've got now this kind of trouble that's developing where there aren't enough bodies to go around. You don't want the students to be sharing them. You don't want the students to be just dissecting one part of it, because if the first time they set up in surgical practice, they get given a lower limb to amputate and really all they've done is arms, then that's going to be really bad. You want them to be able to find a way around internally. One of the reasons for these is getting out things like bladder stones. That is incredibly painful to get out. It's incredibly painful to get out surgically. One of the people that was really good at it, I mentioned earlier, was Astley Cooper, and that's because he used to do a lot of dissections. He would dissect in his spare time. He used to have bodies delivered to his house. But because we're getting hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of medical students and fewer corpses, we go from hanging 500 people a year to hanging 50 people a year. Then something needs to be done. And students start to take things into their own hands. And the first actual body snatchers that we have on record are two Aberdeen University students who went out and got their own corpse from one of the local churchyards in order to be able to perform their dissection. Now, I don't know about you. When I was at university, I studied as an anatomist. I really struggled to even get to a 9 o'clock lecture, let alone get up at 2 o'clock in the morning and go and dig myself up my own test subject. So I have to admire them. But as criminals go, they weren't particularly good, so they would get caught. That was starting to affect the reputations of the surgeons themselves, and that creates a massive problem. In there, this massive black market develops for human corpses, and that's where you want to get the professional help that we so need. Now, one of the reasons that we know about this sort of professional help and how far it really reaches is this book here. Now, it's a rare thing on two fronts. Number one, it is a primary source from 1821. So what you're looking at here is a scan of a 204-year-old document. But it's actually a diary of a body snatcher. It's known as the Diary of a Resurrectionist. It's a man called Joshua Naples, and he was part of the Borough Gang. Now, the Borough Gang was, they were based around London, and they covered an awful lot of the cemeteries. There was between 6 and 8 of them, depending on where you are in time. Sometimes they're inside houses of correction. Sometimes they've gone away. Sometimes they've just gone straight and got other jobs. But there's generally always between about 6 or 8 of them. But throughout, apart from 1 year, Joshua Naples is a solid part of this, and he keeps this. It is an account book. It is an account book of being a body snatcher. So what it's saying, it's showing us how many they're getting. It's showing us which churchyards that they're using, and you can plot these all around London. Many of them are still there. It's showing us how much they are actually selling them for, and how much they are, who they are selling them to. So, for example, on the right, on Saturday the 15th, it'll say met at Bartholomew. So that is St. Bartholomew's Church in Smithfield. A very well visited graveyard by around that time for the body snatcher. And it's really just exciting stuff, is this. You can still see this by appointment. There are about 4 pages of it left, and it's currently in a very nice glass case in the Hunterian Museum in London, the site of the old Great Windmill Street teaching hospital that was itself absolutely up to its neck in body snatching. But because in order to save the doctors' reputations, you start to turn to criminal gangs to get this. And it is quite lucrative. So I've done some basic working out here. So this is based on the economics of 2021 when I did this, but I just want to give you an idea of just how lucrative this is. So if you go back to like 1811, the midway through, what you've got, normal wage for a guy that owns a shovel and a cart, which is pretty much all you need to be a body snatcher plus contacts, is you are looking at 11 shillings a week. Now, you can throw that through inflation calculators with the Bank of England and things like that, and you will get a really kind of like false and potentially disappointing result. So what I did was I compared it to minimum wage. UK minimum wage 2021, £348.80 a week for a typical 40-hour week full-time job. Now, we know from the Borough Gang's diary how much they were getting, because they would meet in the pub and they detailed how much their share was. £21, 9 shillings and 4pence in a week, and that's each out of 6 of them. They are selling bodies at about somewhere between £8 to £10 at a time to the surgeons, and the surgeons are then using them in surgical demonstrations and charging £7 per ticket to 120 people. See the amount of money that's going on there. So if we flip that over to 2021 and compare it to minimum wage, that's 39 times the earnings of the normal labourer. So you would be looking at £13,603.20 a week if you wanted to do this 4 years ago. And if we take that up to being an annual earnings, that is £408,096 per year. Does anybody actually want that as a salary? Feel free to nod or add it into the chat. I am happy with that. Bear in mind as well that you will, with that salary as well, get 4 months of the year off because you do not body snatch in the summer. There is way too much daylight. You don't have enough time. And also the ground heat has a real tendency to denature a body an awful lot quicker. And therefore you have this window of about 2 weeks normally in which you can get the body out and actually sell it. After about 2 weeks of burial, it has decomposed to a level where a surgeon is just not really going to be interested in it. So as you can see, it is massively lucrative. And there are, at one point in the United Kingdom, there are 200 separate resurrection gangs working in the UK. And trust me, they do not get on. You will see a lot of records of them being armed, and it's not to deal with the law because there actually isn't any real law at this point in history. This predates the Metropolitan Police Act. It broadly predates the Bow Street Runners. What you've got is town watches and things like that. Why they're armed is that they're waiting to deal with other resurrection gangs, and this can get quite vicious when there are turf wars over hospitals, there are turf wars over surgeons, there are turf wars over graveyards. It is brutal stuff. For example, again, favourite surgeon that I know is up to his neck in this is Astley Cooper. Astley Cooper actually swapped from the Borough Gang to a different resurrection gang. And in response, the Borough Gang broke into St. Thomas's Hospital, broke into his dissecting room and carved all of the bodies in there into cubes so that they could not be dissected, and he had to give refunds out to all of his teaching subjects. You can imagine how much money that cost him. So because of the amount of money as well, this leads me to dispelling really a myth of the body snatcher. If you ever see the body snatcher kind of in media, okay, and there's a few museums that are guilty of this as well, mentioning no Nottingham Justice museums, but they talk about having their body snatcher presentation. There's a guy who's absolute scruffy peasant, really scruffy peasants, and these guys are not poor at all. If you look at Ben Crouch, the leader of the Borough Gang, I mean, he's like covered in gold rings. He's covered in fancy frock coats. He's really wearing his wealth. And it's not necessarily just attracting the lower classes of society. So this here is my local resurrection gang from Leeds. Okay, as you can see, there is 8 of them. If I actually click the next slide, it gives you what they do for a living, which you may find in some cases surprising. Because we're talking there, there's a lot of white collar work there. You know, John Craig Hodgson's a solicitor's clerk. You know, that's not an unreasonable salary to be on. John Crabtree Pickering, a school teacher, a male school teacher at that. So it's not we're not talking a governess here or anything like that. We're talking a good, solid middle class occupation. You've got joiner, cloth weaver, butcher, shoemaker. These are people with good, solid trades that are successful in markets. You know, they're not doing this out of desperation or poverty. They're doing this out of sheer, utter greed for the amount of money that is involved in it. So, first question then is, how do you go about doing it? And again, if you see, and I'll be using this image a lot here, this is an 1847 sketch called The Resurrectionists. And almost everything that you see in this image is completely and utterly wrong. We have this again, this idea of the illiterate peasant, the man that just owns a shovel and all he can do is dig. And it really isn't, because when you look at how you go about actually finding who you should take out, there is a whole intelligence operation that goes on that's very well financed through all that money as well. So first things first is to know where you're going and know what you want to be stealing. And so there's a number of methods that they use to do this. And one of the things this does is it absolutely proves literacy amongst them. Because the first thing that they're doing is they're all reading the Times. Because the Times contains all of the funeral announcements that are coming up in the next week. So you just pick up your copy of that, and then you know right from there where all the fresh corpses are going to be buried. Remember, this is a time that predates cremation. So we absolutely know if there is a funeral, it is going to be a burial. So we know that they are. Now, you first then go, you might get your sexton, your gravedigger, or your church warden. They can easily be bribed. Again, if you think average wage is 11 shillings a week, if you're something like a gravedigger, you're getting 3 shillings a night. Okay, so you're slightly above that wage. But when you bear in mind that somebody who's getting £21 a week is quite capable of coming and dropping 8 times your salary just for you to turn the other way, or particularly point out where all the fresh bodies are, because the fresher, the better. Other thing that they want to know is roughly where in the ground that body is. And they do this in a quite ingenious manner. So ladies out there, welcome to the forefront, because they would invite the women in, and the women are going to go to all these funerals posing as mourners, and they're going to go hysterical on command. So ladies out there, if you feel that you can go hysterical on command, there is a career for you in body snatching, or at least there was. And they would be by the graveside crying, wailing, oh, it was Uncle Bob, he was absolutely fantastic, he made jam, he was a martyr to his feet, and so forth. And all the time throughout this, they're making notes, and they're making notes of how far down in the ground is that body, because we're not in a time of the standard 6 feet under here. That is Victorian. That comes an awful lot later, where the Victorians kind of standardized cemeteries. What you've got here is basically, the cheaper the grave, the closer it is to the surface. Because if you think, when you're paying a gravedigger, you're paying for their time and you're paying for their labor. So a 6-foot hole is going to cost you an awful lot more than a 3-foot hole is going to be. And what we tend to find is that a lot of people are buried under about 2 feet of soil. That's about the minimum. And so you want to know which those are. Okay, so you're going to go to all the funerals, you're going to send somebody to all the funerals, you're going to gather that information on the same day, because you don't want to leave this too long. Like I say, you've got a 2-minute window to do so. We find that in the front of the Borough Gang's diary, the Naples diary as well, there are almanacs of the phases of the moon, because you don't want to be doing this under a full moon on a clear night. These people are monitoring the weather as best as they can actually forecast the weather at the time. There's an awful lot of science that is going into stealing this body, an awful lot of work. Other ways that they would use the ladies as well is that they would send them to workhouses. Workhouses, that people die in workhouses all the time, especially because a lot of workhouses have infirmaries attached to them. And if nobody's coming forward to claim the body, then the funeral expenses fall on the workhouse, and they don't want to pay the funeral expenses. So if you turn up claiming to be a relative, they're not going to ask too many questions, at which point you get to walk away with a nice, fresh, undisturbed body that you haven't even need to dig up. So the amount of intelligence that is going on in this is just phenomenal. Now, that was rule one. Once you've located your body, then you need to know what to do with it. So rule two, always use a wooden shovel. And if you want to track a body snatcher throughout the archives, what you are looking for is you are looking for people that are buying wooden shovels. Generally speaking, they tend to be a lot more expensive than a metal shovel because it takes a lot more time and care to actually carve a wooden shovel than it does for your typical blacksmith just to beat out the metal into a sheet and attach it to a pole. So you tend to find they're a bit more expensive. People keep records of them, and that's a good way of adding a little bit of evidence to if the person you are following is actually getting involved in the body snatching trade. But you'd use a wooden shovel because a metal shovel makes a very, very distinct grave diggy kind of noise. You know, it's a very unmistakable. If you were to walk past a churchyard and you have that digging noise that you can imagine in your head, that's very suspicious. If you walk past a churchyard at 2 o'clock in the morning and you heard somebody digging, you're going to think, what the hell is going on here? And you might think, hang on a minute, that could be my relative they're digging up. You may well go and investigate. That's dangerous for all concerned. So a wooden shovel has a remarkably low kind of noise that it makes into the soil, to the point where if there's a decent bit of wind around, you'll not even hear it. So who's using a wooden shovel in order to keep the noise down? Because although being discovered is not the end of the world, it's a bit of a two-edged sword. Like I say, we've got no police that are going to come along at this stage. Bow Street Runner's probably going to stay out of the way. What you do have, however, is concerned relatives and concerned citizens, or possibly other resurrection gangs. And that's where things can get bloody. There was one case in Dublin where a group of body snatchers was actually disturbed by an armed posse of the family of the person they happened to be digging up at the time. And that resulted in an open shootout over 20 minutes in the middle of that graveyard. So you are taking your life in your hands by doing so, and you want to be as quiet as humanly possible. And I will come back to an example of a bad body snatcher who did none of these rules a little later on. But rule 3, always get the teeth. You would be amazed how many body snatchers do not remember this rule, but this is an absolute golden rule. Surgeons and dentists are two very, very, very distinct branches of surgery that don't tend to cross over. So if you're going to go to the time and expense of actually getting a body, you can sell that body to the surgeon for about £8, okay, which is a good haul. But if you're clever and you've got a decent set of pliers, because a surgeon doesn't need teeth, what you can do is you can pull the teeth out with a set of pliers and you can sell that to a dentist or a denture manufacturer, and you are probably looking at another £2 or £3 on top of that, because decent quality teeth are rare. And false teeth, you can get them made from ivory, but that's expensive. What you're generally going to do is you're going to have a set of dentures that are made from actual teeth of other people. And this can be incredibly lucrative. So much so that the Borough Gang, at the time of the Battle of Waterloo, actually took a fortnight off from body snatching their way around London and went over to the battlefield of Waterloo and started extracting the teeth of the battlefield dead. And they made about £200 to £300 just by doing that, by just coming back with cases full of teeth. It is incredibly lucrative. So real bonus is there to always get the teeth. And again, if you're caught with some teeth, nobody really minds. If you're caught with a body, stuff happens. So getting the teeth, if you're disturbed part way through and you have to drop the body and run, pocket full of teeth, you've still got more than 3 times the wage of the guy with the shovel, at least, even if you're splitting them between the 6 of you. And rule 4, the important rule 4 here. Now, this one took some uncovering, and this is the one where I really practiced it, which is don't dig too much. And what you find with a close examination again of the Borough Gang's diary is we have this, and it's been shown in an awful lot of movies. It's been shown in an awful lot of like comic strips and illustrated guides to this sort of thing, and is in the picture that I use opposite of the Resurrectionists, 1847. As you can see, what they've done is that they've taken the entire coffin out of the ground. No, you don't do this at all. For the simple reason that it takes an awful lot of effort to actually get that coffin out of the ground. Okay. Even if you're in a reasonably kind of like dry summery time, and bear in mind, you're doing this in the winter time, so you're not. Okay. Digging down through all that earth and then across to the entire level of the coffin, and then digging down to the sides and the underside of that coffin to get it to unstick from the mud, lift it out, and then open it up is massively time consuming. And you don't need any of that stuff, and it just gives you more stuff to put back. So there is actually a technique to getting a body out, and this is the one that we tried. So what you would do is you would dig down at the head end. Now, you always know where the head end is in a Christian graveyard. They all point the same way. So all you need to do is look for somebody who's got a headstone. That will tell you where the head end is. You know the dimensions of the grave because you'll still be able to see all the soil turned over and so forth. You just need to know which end to start at. So you're always going to start at the end that is pointing east. It'll point in the same direction of the church. And go and have a look in churchyards now. You'll find that they'll point the same way. So you have to dig down the head end, and you're going to basically dig about a third of the length of that grave. You're just going to dig a hole straight down up until the point that you actually hit the coffin lid. And in piling that earth up, you want to pile it up on the other end of the grave. Don't start spreading it all over the place. Pile it up on the other end of the grave because you're going to use it later. It has a dual function. This is going to brace the coffin lid. Once you get down to the coffin lid, take your wooden shovel and give it one good hard crack on that coffin lid. Okay, and that will be enough to break it. Coffin lids are not that solid. So that will break, and we can tell that coffin lids are not that solid. If you go into any graveyard, you'll see all the graves are sunken. That's because the coffins have collapsed. Okay, it does not take the coffin a long time to rot or weaken. Once you put it in the ground, that process starts. So it's actually weaker when you're in there. So you crack that open, and then what you're going to do is using that extra earth to brace that, you're going to break that coffin lid open and slide it up. And then you're going to place a piece of fabric around the fabric or rope, or some people use butcher's hooks, put it under the armpits or around the neck or anything like that. And then you can literally get out of the grave, and 2 of you can pull that body straight out, leaving a very small hole behind. Okay. Now, if you look at the newspaper article that I've got here, this is, I mentioned a bad body snatcher earlier on. Okay. And this is Thomas Brown, and he's one of my local ones. Now, bear in mind, he's only dealing with a small coffin as well, because what he was trying to do was steal the body of a young girl called Hannah Heesum. And I say young girl, she was 5. He's trying to steal the body of a 5-year-old child, because 5-year-old children you can get money for them. Because if you think, there's 2 real great classes of people that we do not hang, even in the Georgian period. Okay. That is women, because we burn them, we don't hang them. And that is children, we don't hang. Okay. So getting hold of legal corpses of children and women is remarkably hard. You've got to go down the legal route, and they know they've got the monopoly on that. So as you can see, this chap here, Whitkirk Church, is disturbed 3 times at the grave by people passing through the churchyard at the same time. Struggled getting the lid fastened down. He's trying to actually open the coffin. He ends up actually taking the whole coffin out and then taking it to a neighboring field over a wall to the south side of the church to try and get the body out. It took him a phenomenal amount of time. This is not a good body snatcher. He did get caught. One thing I do love about this particular news article, though, is just the acidic tone in which they describe him. Because from the confession of the prisoner, a brickmaker by trade, but he was never known to work and formerly resided in Seacroft, which tells you everything really that they thought about him. He was absolutely clueless as a body snatcher because he wasn't using that method. And this is actually the graveyard where that theft took place. So this is St. Mary's in Whitkirk in Leeds. This is the house where he was disturbed. You can overlook it's the only house with windows overlooking the graveyard because these weren't built at the time. And we think, according to the church warden, that the body is somewhere at the top end of this view in front of the house because they were very close to the wall because children don't take up a great deal of space. And this is a sketch, although this is a Victorian sketch, but this is one of the few areas of the kind of body snatching legend that I can see has been done correctly. And this is literally, as you can see, there's the small hole there. They've got the rope round and they're going to pull it up. They don't really mind if the head comes off because surgeons are not interested in the head. Nobody's really doing brain surgery or anything like that. What they're looking for is research into stomach surgery, reattaching arteries and so forth. It is impossible then and now really to do a successful head amputation. So they're really going to be focused on limbs and bones and orthopedics and that kind of thing, are the anatomists. So if the head comes off when it comes out, so be it. Probably knock a little bit of a discount off for not an entire body. But there you go. Okay, rule 5. This is really important. Really important. And this is one of the, again, adds to one of my great myths, which is when people talk about body snatchers and they use the term grave robbers. And it drives me up the wall. Because the one great bit of evidence that we have of where body snatchers have been around is that what you find is that the coffin has got no body in it, but anything that they were buried with is left behind. Okay. And there's a really important distinction for that, really important reason for that. Now, I mentioned going earlier on when I talked about the Waltham Black Act of 1750. Okay, which causes this massive spike in executions where people can get executed for virtually anything. That comes in 1750, lasts until about 1810, 1815, and is a system of law that we have known as the Bloody Code, if anybody's ever heard of the Bloody Code. If not, we're going to play a small game. So this is where there's some audience participation in the chat. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a series of crimes. There are 6 of them. Okay. If you think I am making one up, then I want you to let me know in the chat. Okay, so they'll be numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. If you think that what the one I'm telling you about is the one I've made up, drop the number in the chat. Okay, so number 1. Impersonating a Chelsea pensioner. Can that get you hanged? Number 2, being in a public park with a blackened face. Number 3, damaging a tree. Number 4, harming a horse. Number 5, damaging a fish pond. And number 6, pickpocketing to the value of more than 1 shilling. Now, out of those 6 crimes, 5 of those are going to get you hanged. I will do you a quick recap. So number 1, impersonating a Chelsea pensioner. Number 2, being in a public park with a blackened face. Number 3, damaging a tree. Number 4, harming a horse. Number 5, damaging a fish pond. And number 6, pickpocketing more than 1 shilling. Okay, I can see some guesses in the chat there. And the 3 of you who went for number 4, apart from Alice, who just changed her mind at the last minute. If you went for number 4, you were correct. Harming a horse will not get you hanged. Stealing the horse will, but harming the horse won't. That will get you fined quite heavily, but harming the horse won't get you hanged. The rest of them absolutely do carry a death penalty, and they're not even some of the most ridiculous ones that carry a death penalty as well. You can find that another crime that comes in under the bloody code is theft to the value of more than 5 shillings. So they do distinguish between theft and pickpocketing. So pickpocketing, they treat it as more as like a personal invasion of space, which is why you're hanged for more than 1 shilling. Typical things like assault, murder, petty treason, that sort of thing, obviously. Keeping the company of gypsies for more than a month, that will get you hanged, as will damaging Westminster Bridge. That will get you hanged as well, which sounds a bit extreme, but if you look at a map of London of the time, there are only 2 bridges that cross the Thames. You damage one of them, you're going to really hit the economy of London. And because there's no police force here, there's no real kind of deterrent to crime apart from what'll happen to you if we catch you. Now, this is a really important kind of knock-on effect to the body snatcher, because it's a tenet of anti-slavery legislation that nobody can own your body. Your body cannot be owned. And if your body can't be owned, then it isn't an asset where the owner can be permanently deprived of it. And that is the legal definition of theft. It is taking with the intent to permanently deprive the owner of the asset. Something that cannot be owned cannot be stolen. And therefore, technically, this isn't a crime. Where it becomes a crime is if you are to take, like, the ring that they were buried with. If they were buried with their wedding ring, if you're taking that, that is an asset. That is theft. Doesn't matter if the owner is dead, it is still owned. Okay. If you take the burial shroud, that is more than 5 shillings worth of linen. Okay. That's going to get you hanged under the capital theft. So leaving all the grave goods behind is the difference between dancing the Tyburn jig on the outskirts of Hyde Park and being hanged and potentially dissected yourself, or getting away with potentially a £10 fine that is likely to be paid by the surgeon that you are supplying, or possibly at the worst case about 3 months in a house of detention or house of correction. And this chap here, 1827, absolutely falls foul of it. Now, Thomas Vaughan is a body snatcher in Great Yarmouth. And what he does is he's quite notorious for it. When he's eventually caught, he is caught with a body. And on that body, he tried to get a ring off. He'd left everything else in the grave, but he couldn't get this ring off the finger. And what he should have done is just cut the finger off and leave it behind. But he didn't. He thought he'd get away with it. So he wrapped up the body, took the body away, and he was stopped by concerned citizens en route, who then discovered him carting this body away from the graveyard. And while he tried to claim that, he was taking her to the undertaker's, it's like, no, she's that covered in soil. We know this one's been buried already. So he was caught and he was brought up in front of magistrates. And because she still had the ring on the finger, he at that point could be charged with capital theft. Now, this is after the bloody code has come down, so he doesn't get hanged for it. But what was getting everybody else a £10 fine got him transportation to Tasmania for 7 years of hard labour. And that is the difference then between between taking the ring, taking the goods, and not. So one of the clearest pieces of evidence that we have, and I have like archaeologist friends all over the country when they're excavating a 19th century churchyard, are on the lookout for this to let me know that it's there. So what you get is that you get an empty coffin, but it's still got a whole load of stuff in it. So case that I researched, Martha Oddy in Leeds, her grave was uncovered. There was no body in it, but a tortoise shell comb that she was buried with and her burial shroud were left behind within that coffin. And a few years ago, when they did the major excavation of St. James's Churchyard in London for HS2, what they did at that point then was they had to, because all that railway's going through it, they had to pull all the bodies out and go and rebury them at Brookwood Cemetery. And what they found was that 1 in 3 graves in that churchyard did not have a body in it, but still had all the stuff left behind. It's an absolute gold mine to a bunch of body snatchers. So let that be a lesson to you. Always get the body. And then last rule, very important rule, always tidy up. And this leads me to a very disturbing thought. But basically, body snatchers are creatures of habit, and they like to use the same graveyards over and over and over again. And one of the best things that they can do to do that is leave absolutely no trace that they were there at all. Now, I mentioned Thomas Brown earlier, the brickmaker by trade who had never really worked. He made such a mess of that graveyard that he was caught. And we know he was caught because he made such a mess of the churchyard that body snatching gang actually handed him over to the authorities, because it had meant he'd made such a screw up of that graveyard that they couldn't go anywhere near it again. It completely put all the local community on watch, and they were having patrols around that graveyard so that everybody within it could stay safe. He was clever, though, was William Yeardley, who is the guy that handed Thomas Brown over, because he waited until they'd sold the body, and then he got his share of the reward for that before handing him over to the authorities and getting the £10 reward for information leading to the capture of the body snatcher. So always leave yourselves tidied up at the end. And this gives me quite a scary thought, really, of go and have a walk around a local churchyard, particularly about the area where you've got graves that are buried between sort of 1820 and 1830, because you've got to wonder just how many empty graves are there that we just don't know about. Because a good body snatcher, someone like the Borough Gang were never caught. Okay, they would leave no trace that they were ever in the area. The only reason that we know about the Borough Gang is from the diary and from the fact that when both Joshua Naples and Ben Crouch, the leader, actually gave up body snatching, they actually talked about it. And that's the only reason that we know. There are going to be hundreds of graves out there that are empty that we've got just no idea about. And that can be that can be hundreds, quite a lot. The Borough Gang were capable of getting 15 bodies in a night. Each night. They could just about keep up with the rate of funerals for certain churchyards. So I mentioned there was one comment there that said there'll be body snatching the unvaccinated in a few years' time. I assure you that they won't, because there's no need to do it anymore. And it's really one thing then followed by another that utterly kills off body snatching, at least in the UK, because what happens is that the government decide that something should be done. And this is as a result of what's known as the Italian boy murders. And it's not a case that I've looked in absolutely graphically, but it is a case of known as the London Birkings, and it's where people were killed so that they could have so that their body could be sold to a surgeon. Now, I tend to depart a little bit from typical historian thinking in this one, because the London Birkings happened in 1828, and there's this outcry in Parliament that something must be done, and I'm not entirely convinced because really politicians are only ever scared of losing their seat. It's really the only thing that politicians bother about. And nobody who is affected by the resurrection gangs has the vote. So they're of no threat to a politician at all. But another thing happens in 1828, which did pique my interest, and that is that the first surgeon is fined for illegally acquiring a cadaver. Now, I think at that point, when surgeons are starting to get fined, they're going to talk to all the same members of their country club, some of which are going to be MPs, and demand that something is done about this situation. So what you get then is the 1832 Anatomy Act, which does solve the problem by killing the market straight out. Pretty much overnight, body snatching stops, resurrection gangs cease to be a thing. Because now what you can get is the unclaimed dead of the workhouse. You can literally turn up as a surgeon and not even a surgeon, claim bodies completely free of charge, take them away, dissect them. Why on earth you are going to go and pay a resurrection gang £10 a time to give you a 3-day-old body when you can get an absolutely fresh one just from all you have to do is turn up to the workhouse. They keep them on ice for you. And it just annihilates that market overnight. And that's why we don't see the body snatcher as being a serious force after 1832, once that comes into force. Body snatching does still happen, but it happens for very different reasons. And it doesn't happen a great deal in the UK, but there's a couple of quite famous cases in America. Number one, body of Charlie Chaplin. That was stolen, snatched, and it was ransomed back to his family. So that's why you then steal a body after the Anatomy Act. Another famous one is that a group did try to steal the body of Abraham Lincoln, but they were actually stopped by the United States Secret Service at the time, so that never really went anywhere. But yeah, the reason that we don't have any body snatching now is thanks to the Anatomy Act of 1832. And then following the First World War, you could then leave your body to science, which is where the bulk of anatomists, including the people that I had to study, that's where the bulk of anatomist training comes from now. People are actually donating their body for scientific study. Which lastly brings me, when I talked about the London Birkings, I'm going to talk very briefly about the UK's, definitely the UK's, and quite possibly the world's most famous pair of body snatchers. I am talking about Burke and Hare. And if it's one thing that really annoys me, it's these two. And this was the subject of the first episode of my podcast, where we do Burke and Hare are not body snatchers. If you take anything else away, if you don't take anything else away from this presentation, please take this message. Burke and Hare are not body snatchers. They are just murderers. They are serial killers. They start out because a tenant of William Hare dies owing him rent. They discover that they can sell the body to Dr. Robert Knox for £4, which more than covers the rent. Okay. Another tenant who is close to death, I wouldn't say he's dead, but he is dying. That's when they do their first kill, because they just help him on his way and then sell the body for £10. And then they start murdering people, strangling people, bashing them over the head in the street. They basically kill, what we know of, 11 people that they sold bodies for, and that's just the ones that we know. They're actually caught when one of the local surgeon, Robert Knox, actually does a surgical demonstration and a dissection in front of an audience. And in that audience is somebody who knew that body and could confirm that she was in good health 2 days ago. And that really strikes up the suspicion, which leads to them being arrested. And then there's this lovely romantic tale where, like, Hare turns king's evidence and things like that. But Really, Hare just ratted Burke out completely, and Burke had no defense. William Burke is then hanged and then actually sent for dissection himself in a beautiful irony. There are photographs of his body out there. I haven't used them because it does breach the Scottish law on the photography of human remains if you don't have advance permission, so I'm not be showing that. But if you really want to go and search for the skeleton of William Burke, you can find photographs of it. And if you go to the Anatomical Museum at Teviot Place in Edinburgh, it does have public open days, and you can go and view him. He's still in there today. So I hope that's kind of tickled your fancy for the joys that are body snatching, and there probably is going to be some in your local area. If you wanted to get more information on it, if you wanted to do any sort of reading up, the first book that I would recommend is Susie Lennox Body Snatchers. It's a very entry-level guide to body snatching, but one of the things I love about it is she's not written it as a historian. She's actually trained as an archivist, is Susie. So it's one of the best indexed books I have ever come across. And so if you're wanting to find out, is there cases in your area that we know about, then it is going to be in Susie's book. It will at least get a mention. There was a mention in there when I mentioned Martha Roddy earlier, just the line in the book that said, body of a 15-year-old girl, Martha Roddy, was stolen from a churchyard in Armley, and the body was put back in its original grave after her uncle gave her £50 reward. £50 reward, of course, being nearly about 12 times what the body was actually sold for. And that led me to, because I live just down the road from it, that led me to go on a bit of a lockdown quest, really, that my wife referred to as Paul being on the internet looking for teenage girls. But I did manage to track that theft, who stole it, who bought the body, where the body was discovered, where they were arrested, where the body snatcher actually served time in York Castle Jail, and so forth. So there's a lot of information in there that you can pick threads of your own local cases for, and I would heartily recommend it. If you are looking for something that's a lot more in-depth and a lot more academic, because I know I've got some academics here, then that book on the right there, Death, Dissection and the Destitute by Ruth Richardson, is an absolute deep dive into poverty and body snatching and that market. So do go. Both of those are available on Amazon and through independent bookshops, and I would heartily recommend both of them. So thank you very much. If you would like to connect with me and my work any further, then that is my podcast. There is a new episode out every Monday. The current episode that we've got out at the moment is all about women in intelligence, and that female spies are not glamorous. They're just damn competent. And then next week's will be medieval people do have table manners, Every week we ask a historian, what is the one thing you wish we would all stop believing? Light that blue touch paper and let them run. And you can get that wherever you get podcasts. Thank you very much. I am open for questions if anybody wishes to ask them. I'll do my best.
Thank you very much, Paul. That was certainly whet the morsels there for what the topic's all about. I often find there's a cross pollination of an audience between those who like the paranormal topics and those who like true crime. And I think actually what you've presented here today kind of sort of borders on both, because I highly suspect there was a lot of superstitions what grew up around that, and protecting the bodies of those under the ground, and protecting your families and all the different charms that people might use. And they were probably done on purpose to try and prevent grave robbers or who they believed were vampires stealing their bodies from the ground. So I suspect there is a cross-pollination of those topics at that time. Did you find it like that?
Yes, I tend to be less superstitions, but there's some really incredible ways that people have gone to try and prevent body snatchers actually sort of stealing the bodies. So you get some very low rent ones, some of which are quite counterproductive. So there was a thing for leaving like polished white stones on the top of graveyards, because it would just show whether or not the grave had been disturbed. What that actually did in reality was show the body snatcher where the really fresh grave was. And also that person, because that was a relatively cheap thing to do, it showed a body snatcher that family wasn't that rich, and therefore that body was unlikely to be that far down in the ground. So they actually had the counterproductive effort at that point. It caused more thefts there than it did. Another one was to put, and I've tried this one as well. But another is to put layer of straw, layer of soil, layer of straw, layer of soil as you're burying the body. This is one of the things that got in the way of Thomas Brown and Hannah Heatham, because that was done, but it wasn't done particularly well. So you just had one lot of straw to get through. It's really hard to get a wooden shovel through a layer of straw. It's a really good defense. You can get higher things if you go up to the churchyard, the Greyfriars Kirkyard in the centre of Edinburgh. What you can see there is mort safes, and there's a thing that goes around the internet frequently that just shows a cage over a grave with the word "I have questions" or "It's there to keep vampire in," something like that. It isn't. It's there to keep a resurrectionist out. It's basically a metal cage. And if you've got a family plot, then you can get a big metal cage known as a cage lair. That will cover the entire thing. It's it's locked. It's quite heavy. If you go onto Google Street View and go to Glasgow Cathedral, they actually put all their churchyard paths on Google Street View, and you can take a virtual walk around there and see the cage lairs that they've still got there. There's some beautiful photographs of the mort safes at Greyfriars Kirkyard.
Oh, fantastic.
If you go to Preston Park Museum in Stockton, they have a cemetery gun, which is basically something you attach to the top of the headstone, attached to a tripwire. And the idea being is when the shovel goes in, it trips the tripwire and blows your bloody head off. It doesn't work because body snatchers just cut the tripwire. But if you really want to go insane, what you need is the Americans and the coffin torpedo. And we actually have, there's a patent for this. So we know somebody invented it. But nobody's been around to actually, certainly nobody's survived it if we've actually seen one in action. But that actually involves a static electric charge around the coffin, and the coffin is filled with gunpowder. The idea being is if the coffin lid is brought up, the spark sets the gunpowder off and blows the whole thing to shit. But yeah, so it's really incredible ways of trying to defend against this.
But if we have an ask of you, we ask that you hit the like button here, we ask that you hit the subscribe button. And the reason is, for you it is just a moment, but for us it really helps the algorithm find our content and other people find what really is deeply interesting to them.
Let's just run through a few of the comments as well as questions. Kieran Farrell says, there was an old saying that the operation was a success, but the patient died. And James Wright said, David Warner and Steve Martin's The Man with Two Brains, the operation was a success, but the doctor died.
Classic film. I remember watching that one, thoroughly enjoyed it.